Good afternoon. Meeting to order of the Kingman City Council. This is a work session, and all work items listed are for discussion only. There's no action that can or will be taken, and the primary purpose of work session meetings is to provide the City Council with the opportunity for in-depth discussion and study of specific subjects. Public comment is not provided for on the agenda and may be made only as approved by a consensus of the council. In appropriate circumstances, a brief presentation may be permitted by a member of the public or another interested party on an agenda item if invited by the mayor or city manager to do so. The mayor may limit the time or end the time for such discussions. And today we have one item on the agenda, and that is the review and discussion of development fees or impact fees. And so at this time, and this meeting is taking place, on Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021. And obviously it is being held electronically. So with that, I will turn this meeting over to Manager Foggin.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. Thank you, Council, for being able to attend. We do have the Vice Mayor, who indicated that he's running a little bit late. He will be joining us. And Councilor Nelson had indicated that she is on the road and will be joining us by phone. And she hopes not to be disconnected at some point because of lack of cell service. With that, we wanted to talk to you before we actually have the public hearing on impact fees and the assumptions used. So there's a number of steps, I think, as everybody's aware, in which we have to go through and to adopt impact fees. And so in the discussions with where we are, we thought that it would be good to just stop and talk to you about what you can expect as far as the next council meeting, the public hearing item. And since we visited about development fees back in November and December, we've adjusted our assumptions based on feedback and comments from the stakeholders. As you recall, we invited stakeholders to come to a meeting where the impact fees or development fees were shared, the assumptions were shared. And so over the last couple of months, we've actually been taking feedback and suggestions from the stakeholders being builders, developers, I think the public at large, as well as people affected by impact fees or development fees as well. And so really our hope today is to share with you all the adjustments, where the actual fees are. We also are interested in knowing if where the council is. Obviously, this is a workshop. It's for discussion purposes, but we want to know kind of how you're feeling about impact fees. We started this conversation back way back in 2019, actually now. So we've actually been working on this for over 2 years now, or talking about it. And so we really want to understand how you're feeling about them. We want your input on the assumptions, of course. And so with that, Tina and her team have done a lion's share of the work. She's worked closely with all the departments and the leadership teams from all the departments. And so really, I'm going to turn this over to her and have her talk to you about the journey, and then introduce our consultant, who we've been working with diligently now for quite a while. And so go ahead, Ms. Tina.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Foggin. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. And I think Mr. Foggin really talked about the journey. It has been a long one, and we hired our consultants back in, I want to say, November of 2019, and they have been working with us on putting these fees together and have been working with us and the stakeholders in making these adjustments over the last 5 months or so. So I do want to give a big shout out to our streets, parks, police and fire departments, engineering departments, who have been a huge help and have been great assistance in helping us develop these fees. So I want to make sure and recognize all of them too. So with that, I'm going to actually hand the time over to Ben Griffin, who you did not see at our last work session, but he was on the phone, and today he will be presenting. He is our senior fiscal economic analyst for this study. Ben?
Thanks, Tina. Mayor, Council, thanks for allowing me to present tonight. As you know, Mr. Foggin and Ms. Moline, have said, there's been a lot of work since the last time you saw these fees. We took what the stakeholders said, we took what the staff comments, and really went back and double checked everything, made sure that any comment that we received, that we reviewed it and discussed it with staff to make sure sort of what the best next steps were. So today, we're going to do a quick review of just development fee basics. So in case you have never dealt with development fees before, or it's just been a while since the fall when we last talked about these, just a quick overview. We're going to talk about the land use assumptions, because that is one of the things that you will have to adopt in the next few months. We'll talk about the infrastructure improvement plan. So essentially, the projects or the level of service standards that we use to calculate the fees. Then we'll do a fee summary and review the adoption timeline. If at any point you have a question, just feel free to interrupt me, ask your question. Essentially, this is meant to, give you 100% access to me, ask any sort of question, and that way, once we have the public hearing for the land use assumptions and IIP, everyone understands everything as needed. We don't want to have any sort of confusion in that meeting. So in Arizona, development fees have 3 components, or they're required to have 3 components. The first is the land use assumptions document. So that's, looking at, about 10 years of development projections, and, you have to adopt this. Next up is the IIP, or the infrastructure improvements plan. Again, we're looking at 10 years of, level of service standards and projections of demand. And then the final component will be the development fees. You'll see that tonight, but, you will adopt the development fees separately after you've adopted the land use assumptions and the IIP. So you'll hear a lot about level of service. So some things, with impact fees, the level of service that you use in the calculation of these fees cannot exceed the level of service provided to existing development. If you do charge a higher level of service, then there has to be some sort of outside funding source to raise that level of service. So for example, if you have 5 acres of parks per 1,000 persons, but you want to base the fees on 6 acres per 1,000, well, you have to find another revenue source to bridge that gap. So essentially, you're charging existing development for an extra acre per 1,000, and that way everyone is assessed the same level of service. There are some limitations in Arizona. So Arizona defines anything that can be included in the development fees as a necessary public service. So some of the limitations are, parks can't exceed 30 acres unless there's a direct benefit to development. Libraries can't exceed 10,000 square feet. No regional training facilities for public safety. So, we've looked at all this. We've made sure that, nothing that should be excluded from your development fees is included, and we're good there. So I alluded to the adoption at separate times for separate components. So right now we're looking at round 1. So your first public hearing will be the public hearing for the land use assumptions in the IIP. 30 days later you can adopt that, but no more than 60 days later. once that's adopted, then you'll have your public hearing and adoption for the development fees. You know, we show you everything at once. That way, you know the fees associated with the IIP that you're adopting. So again, you're going to see fees in this next hour, and again, you're not adopting those for a few more months, but we want you to see those so you really understand what it is that you're adopting. So there are 3 methodologies that we use for impact fees, and essentially we think of them as past, present, future. So past would be a buy-in or a cost recovery, and a great example of this would be if you've oversized a water treatment plant, or you've built some sort of oversized police station, and that you have excess capacity, and so you want future development to buy into that excess capacity. Incremental expansion is looking at the present. So essentially it's saying this is our level of service today, and we want to maintain that going forward. So if you are at 5 acres of parks per 1,000, and you want to maintain that, then that would be your level of service standard that's used in the calculation of the fees. And then the future would be plan-based. So you say, hey, we know that we want to build this. Our CIP or our master plan defines, this level of service. So we need to get to that. And usually when you're looking at a plan-based approach, there is, future development share, but there's also existing development share. So you have to, realize what it is that you're signing the city up for if you go with a plan-based approach where there is existing development share. So, think about, hey, yeah, we're getting this revenue to cover future development share, but, how do we come up with the money to fund existing development share? And so, that's something that we, also want to discuss, because we don't want you to adopt something and then, not have the money to cover existing development share. So one of the comments that we received in the previous meeting was that, development fees slow growth. Well, there have been a lot of studies on that over the years, and there's really been no correlation between enactment of development fees and a decrease or reduction in growth. So I've cited a couple of examples. These are from Florida, but what they're doing is they're just saying, hey, here are if we're doing some sort of new fee or we have a fee increase, is that slowing growth? Is it driving growth to our neighbor? And just the data, they don't prove it. And so what you see at the bottom, in July of 2006, your non-utility fees became effective. And we all know that the Great Recession started shortly after that. And so what we're doing here is just showing you that you in fiscal year 2007 you enacted new fees, but residential housing starts in Kingman were already on the decline at that point, related to the recession. And if you look at the green line, which is the United States, compared to Kingman, which is your local data, they're essentially following each other. And so there's no hard evidence that can tie the decrease in development in Kingman to enactment of those development fees. Because when you compare it to the rest of the country, I don't know any communities in Kansas or North Dakota that have impact fees, but those states as well had a slowdown in the housing market, and so that's something that we wanted to point out, that there's just no data that support enacting fees will slow growth. You enact the fees because you want to preserve that level of service. There's a reason that people want to move to Kingman, and there's infrastructure that is required as you grow. And so the development fees are one way to ensure that you can fund those growth related improvements. All right, so next up, we have the land use assumptions. So this is, this is something that you will be adopting in the next couple of months. So what we've done is we've said, all right, based on the last few years of permit data, we're going to assume that you grow at a similar rate going forward. This is a pretty conservative approach, and we really want to take a very conservative approach to this. It was easy for cities to have very low fees in the early 2000s because they could say, oh yeah, we're going to grow by 50,000 people over the next 10 years, and we're going to spread this cost over those 50,000 people. Well, if you only grew by 20,000, well then you weren't charging enough. And so, that throws off the factors. So what we want to do is we want to take a conservative approach to that growth. So what we're saying is, based on your recent permit history, we assume over the next 10 years that you'd grow by about 2,500 housing units. And in those 2,500 housing units, based on your existing population density, you would have about 6,000 residents in those units. We do the same thing for the non-residential development. And so we say over the last few years, you've grown by an average, and we're just going to continue that average going forward. And so we're saying over 10 years, you'd grow by almost 500,000 square feet. And in those 500,000 square feet, you'd have almost 1,200 jobs. So there are any questions on any of the development projections, since that is something that you will have to adopt coming up soon? Okay. All right, so this is a new addition. So in talking with Tina, she brought up that you do have sales tax, a dedicated sales tax that you're using for growth-related capital improvements. So we want to make sure that we're not charging future development, once through an impact fee and then once through the sales tax that they're generating in the city that's going towards those same improvements. So what we've done is we've just said, hey, look, we know that we're spending some of this sales tax revenue on improvements that are similar to what we're including in the development fees. So we just want to provide a credit for that. So you'll notice that the fees are considerably lower this time than what you saw in the last meeting, and that's essentially the sales tax credit that's doing that. So first up, we'll look at fire. So fire would have a citywide service area. So all the fees would be the same for single family, multifamily, whatever in that service area. So we wouldn't it's not like we have a west side of town or an east side of town. It's just one combined service area. So we have three components. The first is fire facilities. The next would be fire apparatus, and then the final component will be communications equipment. We're using the incremental or consumption-based approach on all of these, where it says, hey, we have this many apparatus per person today, or we have this many square feet of fire facilities today. We just want to maintain that going forward. So based on the land use assumptions or those development projections that we just saw, over the next 10 years to maintain your level of service, you would need about 3,000 additional square feet of facilities. And that translates into about $775,000 to use towards those fire facilities. Your fire apparatus, to maintain the level of service, you'd need about 1.5 additional apparatus. And so that translates into about $1 million in fee revenue. And then the communications equipment, 7 additional units, and that would be about $31,000 in fee revenue. So this is the updated fire fee schedule. So you can see that bottom line in the top box, that's the sales tax credit. So essentially making sure that we're not overcharging future development. And so for the fire fees, residential side, we say that cost per person of $296.17. We just multiply that by the persons per housing unit for whatever type of residential development. So for single family, your occupancy is 2.4 persons per housing unit. And so to calculate that single family fee for fire, we just say $296.17 times $2.4 persons per housing unit. And so that's how we're coming up with the proposed fee of $711. On the non-residential side, it's a very similar approach. We say $37.27 per job times the number of jobs per 1,000 square feet. So industrial, for example, has 1.63 employees per 1,000 square feet. And then we divide that by 1,000 because you're going to assess your fees per square foot. So $37.27 times times 1.63 jobs per 1,000 square feet divided by 1,000 gives you an industrial fee of 6 cents per square foot. So do you have any questions on the fire fees?
A general question, Mayor Miles, if I may.
Please go ahead. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Mr. Griffin, it's because I'm new to the council. I just have a question about the calculations for single family versus multifamily. My general question is single family, 1 unit, multifamily, multi-units, more people, more need for service, potential need for service. Can you just help organize that for me in a thought?
Yeah, so you're correct with, a detached unit would be a single family unit. If you have more than, 1 unit on the same parcel, that would be the multifamily. So we're tying the demand for fire services to the number of, people at that site. So yes, the more people you have, the more demand for fire services you would have. So that's why a single family unit, which has the highest occupancy, would also pay the highest fee.
Thank you.
If I could just jump in here real fast, I just want to share with the council that this was an area that the stakeholders brought to our attention, that they did have some concerns with some of the assumptions. We did go back to the drawing board on this and were able to reduce our original fee that was proposed for fire by about $180. Part of that is that sales tax credit, but another part of that is us just again going back to those numbers, and I wanted to be sure that we shared with you.
This is Mayor Miles. I have a question about the incremental criteria to the calculation, because I think about the east side, and I know you said there's no east side, west side, but we know that we need fire facilities on the over in the area that is growing and will grow in the next 10 years. And my understanding has been that's a multi-million-dollar project. So if we're assigning 775,000, something in that magnitude, how does that increment get established over what is an existing requirement?
Great question. So, with the incremental expansion, we just say that you have, so many square feet today. And so, your level of service, and I will look off to the side for a second. You have about 16,000 square feet today. And so based on your existing or your 2020 population, you have about half of a square foot for every resident for fire facilities. And so this is really just saying, hey, based on the projected population growth, you should add a half of a square foot for each new resident. And then we say, well, we want to multiply that half of the square foot by the cost per square foot of that planned station.
I understand the formula. It just seems low, but given the costs that we've been dealing with, but I understand the analysis.
Right. And so previously we were using a higher cost per square foot, but that was one of the comments received from the stakeholders, and they suggested a lower cost per square foot. So we are projecting less fee revenue now than we were a few months ago.
Thank you.
Mayor Miles, I have a question. I think it's probably for Mr. Foggin.
Please go ahead, Councilor Staley.
Well, just a few years ago, when we had the 1% sales tax increase implemented, we had plans to build a new fire station versus remodeling the old one that's right off of Andy Devine. And I seem to remember that the cost of that fire station was a lot higher than $775,000. Isn't that right?
Oh, yeah, it was, the fire station itself was $5 million.
5 minutes.
So,
Actually, go ahead, Counselor. That's what I was referencing also. It's multi-millions. Go ahead.
right. Yes, I'm right there with you, Mayor. It's just, so what I'm understanding is that the builders were looking at how to reduce these fees, and we obliged by calling a fire facility $775,000, even though the reality is it's $5 million. Is that correct?
So the one thing you've got to do, Councilor Staley, is you've got to take into account current level of service. And the problem that the city of Kingman has is that our level of service is low. And so it results in the development fee calculation being low. Because we're behind, the development fee process doesn't let you catch up. And that's a problem that we run into. Frankly, I think you'll see it with all of the fees that we're going to show you. The development fees can only charge new growth for their impact. And so part of the challenge in developing the assumptions were that we did not, as Ben had pointed out, we had not calculated some sales tax that had been adopted to go towards paying for some of these. So you take that combination of impact, or we're behind in the construction or development of these pieces of infrastructure, and then you combine that with the fact that there's some dedicated revenue, and the development fees are not as high as we would obviously hope they would be. And so I guess, Ms. Tina, am I missing something else?
No, and I think, Ben, I was gonna ask you to share that when we build a new station, there is a piece of existing development that pays for that. That $775,000 isn't the cost of that fire station. It's the new development portion of the cost of that fire station. Am I correct on that?
Right, the 3,000 square feet of facilities demanded by growth over the next 10 years, that cost is $775,000. I think that the planned station is about 15,000 square feet. So, this is only going to cover part of it. I mean, we did look at a plan-based approach where we said, hey, what would it take to get us to, this 15,000 square foot facility over the next 10 years? And, essentially it doubles the fees, but remember that it's increasing the level of service. I think existing development share was about $4 million. So I mean, you could generate almost $2 million in fee revenue from development fees, but then the city's on the hook for about $4 million to raise that level of service.
Okay, and thank you. I mean, I understand that, but I think the bigger thing here for the council is to understand that development fees are not going to be the saving grace to building that fire station in the East Bench. It's not going to do it alone. It is going to help, but we still need to look at other revenue sources. Am I correct?
Yep.
Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to answer that.
Mayor, just, I want to answer one other question, why before we get too much further past it. Ben, can we go one slide forward? So, Councilor Samley, there's a piece to this that I just want to point out that's really important as you look at this, as you look at these tables. You want to pay attention to the persons per housing unit as far as the calculations go, not exactly, it's the proposed fees. So if you go jump forward and you take multifamily and you put 2 units on a piece of property, the persons being served by that property jumps to over 3, correct? So it becomes 3.1. So the proposed fee for fire for a 2, like a duplex, would jump ahead of the single family. So instead of being looking like it's lower than single family, you actually result in a fee that's higher. So the price, the person per housing unit is really, really important in that calculation. And it's the reason that it looks disproportionate, but in actuality, the multifamily catches up and quickly surpasses single family fees.
Well, and I thank you for that, Manager Foggin, because I just was thinking multifamily means multiple people. And so if you're telling me cost per unit, I get that, but I mean, there's more people in multifamily than there is in single family. So I appreciate that explanation. And I guess that's kind of where I was going. It's like, how do I calculate out the cost per person?
Yeah, and that's really important when you're developing these fees, is to try to get as close as possible to be as accurate as you can with the average number of people living in these type of dwellings, because you're absolutely right. If we built multifamily and we put 7 people in each unit, then that would be devastating on services, right? And so, but that's not what generally happens. Looking at it, the average really does work out to be what we're showing. So just want to make sure that we made sure to answer that completely.
Thank you. You did a very good job of that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions about fire? All right, Ben.
All right, so we'll move on to Parks and Rec. So again, we're looking at a citywide service area. We have 3 components. There's a land component. So this is to acquire additional park land. There's an improved park land component. So essentially any of your developed parks that don't have, like a ball field or a restroom, anything like that, we know that there is, a cost for, plumbing or for electrical. So this is really, a way to capture that cost that's not associated with, the improvement of a specific type of amenity, but you still know that you've got dirt work or that electrical or water associated with those improvements. And the final component is the park amenities. So your traditional, ball fields, restrooms, concession stands, things like that. So all these we're using the incremental methodology. So basically just saying, hey, whatever we have today, that level of service, we want to maintain that going forward. So 10 years of demand means that you need to acquire 22 additional acres of land. And so that'll cost about $430,000. The improved parkland, so the improvements to that land that we're not capturing with the amenities, you'd need 6 additional acres. And so that'd be, about $495,000. And then the amenities, you would need 63 additional amenities. And that would cost about $2.8 million. So, we're looking at the residential fees ranging from just under $500 to a little over $1,100. And on the non-residential side, in Arizona, if you charge a fee for one type of development, you have to charge it to all types of development. So that's why you're seeing a park fee for the non-residential components. And so those, range from a low of 11 cents per square foot on industrial up to 20 cents per square foot on office. So any questions on the park fees? All right. So move on to police. Again, it's a citywide service area. We have a facilities component, a vehicles component, and then a communications equipment component. Again, all incremental, so we're maintaining the level of service. And to do that, over the next 10 years, you need to construct about 1,600 additional square feet of police facilities, which translates into about $410,000. You would need 9 additional vehicles, which is about $460,000, and then 24 additional units of communications equipment, which would be about $50,000. So again, the fees range from the residential fees range from a low of $137 for any unit that is not single family, multifamily, or mobile, up to a high of $330 for a single family unit. I do want to point out that on the police fees, we're actually using vehicle trips per 1,000 square feet instead of jobs. We found that with the police fees, it's really the vehicle trips generated by those non-residential types that really tie demand for police services. So what we're saying is with the police fees, it's the increase in vehicle trips that's really driving this. So that's why the commercial fees have the highest for this, whereas on the fire fees, it was the office, because the presence of employees at the site is really what was driving the demand. So any questions on the police fees? Okay. All right, the street fees, again, a citywide service area. We're looking at an arterials component, so the traditional streets, and then an improved intersections. So it could be a roundabout or a traffic signal. Again, we're just using the incremental expansion methodology. So to maintain your existing level of service, you need 4.9 additional lane miles of arterials, and that translates into about $4.9 million in fee revenue. And then you would need 3.7 additional intersections, and that translates into about $2.4 million in revenue. So again, on the residential side, the all other category has the lowest fee of $914 per unit, and single family has the highest fee of just under $2,100 per unit. So any questions on the street fees? So this shows you a comparison of the fees. So you can see at the top, this is what we've discussed tonight. So we're saying the combined non-utility fee for single family is about $4,300. And what we showed you in October, the single family fee was almost $5,800. And we sort of hinted at some of the big reasons. So the sales tax credit, that was a big one. We adjusted the fire and police facility cost per square foot downward, and we made some adjustments to some of the parks costs. So I mean, we really listened to what the stakeholders said. Took their comments, made some adjustments. And so, now we're looking at, a fee that's, or single family fee at least, it's about $1,500 less than what you saw in October. Is there any questions on any of the fees? Okay. So this is the updated adoption timeline. So tonight is the work session. So I think the goal is, March 2nd, have a public hearing or we will discuss the land use assumptions in the IIP. And you can have a public hearing to adopt those a minimum of 30 days later, but no more than 60 days. So, you know, if you take a 30-day approach, April 6th, you would adopt the land use assumptions in the IIP. 30 days after that, you would have the public hearing on the development fees, which you've already seen. So really it's, you know, just sort of a technicality because you already know the development fees when you adopt the land use assumptions in the IIP. July 6th, you could adopt those development fees, and then they go into effect a minimum of 75 days later. So that would be a September 20th effective date. So any questions on the adoption or comments, or just general questions and comments?
Madam Mayor.
Yes, hi, Vice Mayor. Please go ahead.
Hi, all of you. Of course, this is just development fees, but let's put all the fees together so we can talk a little more intelligently. In other words, if I wanted to build an 1,800 square foot home, what are my total fees going to be for that home? Because there's sewer connection, there's water connection, and then these additional fees right here. You know, because that's what our builders are concerned about, is all the different fees.
Well, we already have a sewer impact fee.
Yes.
And we already have a water connection fee. So.
Correct.
You want to talk to that, Tina, about kind of where we are?
Sure.
So I'm going to have Tina just share with you the transition of the sewer impact fee, which I think is important for everybody to understand. And like I said, we already have a water fee in place. Ms. Tina?
Yeah. So, although we have a wastewater impact fee or sewer impact fee in place right now, it is dedicated solely to debt service. So when we went out and hired Tischler Weiss to look at all our impact fees, we found that because we serve outside of the city, not just the county, and we wanted to include some growth-related projects, not just debt, into the evaluation, we could no longer really call them impact fees or go through the impact fee process. And so where we are with that is we are currently still in the evaluation piece of the wastewater fees. We've issued a report, and it has to go through a completely different process. So it will go to the Municipal Utilities Commission. We're hoping to do that by the end of March, and then bring that to council for adoption, and then an effective date sometime around the same time that we're adopting the impact fees. As far as the water meter connection fees are concerned, we're going to go through that same process. That also was something that the stakeholders brought up to us. How come we're not evaluating those? And so we've asked Tischler Weiss to look at those as well. And so they will follow suit with the timeline that the sewer fees will follow. And so those will also go to the Municipal Utilities Commission at the same time we take the sewer fees to the commission. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, so Vice Mayor, the reality is that the true increase to develop that 1,800 square foot home is going to be the 4,300 plus the difference between the sewer impact fee and the new fee for sewer, and then the water fee is going to remain the same until we're done with the study. So if we're talking in general, the total fees difference from adopting the impact fees and changing the sewer impact fee to the system-wide fee for sewer, you're probably talking about an increase of a little over $5,000.
About 6,300 is what it comes out to.
6,300
for an average single-family home.
Manager Foggin, I'd like to follow up on that. Vice Mayor, did that answer your question?
Well, it did. In other words, what I want a real number today. I mean, I understand that there's changes coming in effect, but like today, what's for 1,800 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, on average, what's the sewer hookup fee right now?
On average, it's about $1,600,
Okay. And then what about the water meter fee?
$2,500.
Okay. And then any other fees?
Well, of course, there's plan review and
Sure.
But-
Right.
no other fees that we're talking about like these, no.
Right. Okay. So then of course now and we're talking about adding an additional $4,300 on top of these other fees. So we're looking at a total of about. I mean, it has gone down because I remember when we first talked, when this was presented to us back in October, it was like $9,500 for the average. I don't know if that was 1,300, 1,500, 1,800 square foot home.
Well, it doesn't matter the square footage. If it's a single family, it's charged a set rate.
Correct. And that's what I'm referring to as single family then. So it's gone down. We've adjusted the fees downward a little bit, that's good to hear.
Yeah, so it was at 58 and now it's 42.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, too.
But for a total home, we're still looking around $8,500. So just, that's just rough. That still doesn't include plan design or plan review and that kind of stuff, like you said. So, but anyway, because that's what the builders complain. They're saying, well, it's going to cost me close to, before they were saying it was going to cost me close to $10,000 for a home, as of right now, it's costing them around $45,000 to $5,000 per home. So, okay.
Yep.
Manager Foggin, I want to follow through on that a little bit because the sewer hookup and the fees that we're addressing outside of this discussion exist, and they are connected to things that are specific to that individual house. And the ones that we're discussing tonight, I think if I'm following it, are fire, police, parks, and streets, which at this point have to do with the neighborhood, well, individuals clearly, but it's a different set of responsibilities that the city carries that currently aren't reflected in the development and in the housing developments. So is that fair to say? I kind of think of it as one is kind of enterprise funds. The other one looks like more of a general fund thing. But I understand the question, but I think what we're talking about with the impact fees are addressing these other areas that aren't traditionally met or addressed when developing a home or when someone builds a home. Is that a fair assessment?
That's correct, Mayor. And if we were kind of, I don't want to say normal community, but a more, I would say, urban community, we more than likely would be talking about sewer and water impact fees. But the fact of the matter is, we supply sewer and water outside of the city limits. And because we do that, we're not allowed to have impact fees charged against county residents. So we have to do it a different way. So technically speaking, we already have some form of development fee, air quotes, right, for sewer and water.
Right.
And those happen to be enterprise funds. So it just works out that way. But in a normal circumstance, we would be talking about sewer and water as part of our development fees as well. But obviously we can't do that because we have a lot of services outside the city limits. So that, just want to make sure everybody understands that.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. This does address other areas we have to address, but I was doing some calculations here, and even at this level, I think in the past we've talked about that one single family unit cost the citizens that are currently here, about $1,800 a year. Is that right, Manager Foggin, for services that we provide?
Oh, yes, that's correct. Yep.
And so if you take that times 2,500 times 10 years, that's a certain number. I think it's about 45 million. And then if you take this impact fee times that number, times 2,500 times 10, it only covers about, I did this roughly, so don't hold me to it, but it looks like about a fourth of what the city's actually going to have to come up with to cover the cost of the citizens that live here, the cost to really serve these new houses.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody's done that calculation, but it's an interesting one, and I think it would tell a story.
Yeah, I think the best way to look at it, as Ben had described, is look at the fire station as an example. So you need a 14,000 square foot fire station, and new growth is being charged 3,000 feet of it. So it's actually a little more than a fourth, or a little less than a fourth.
Yeah, I would say a little less, if anything. So as Councilor Staley was pointing out, it won't, the additional revenue will have to be found for the growth, but this does contribute to those factors that we as a city have to provide to our citizens that aren't really just that aren't attached to the house.
Yep.
Mayor Miles, if I may ask a question of Ms. Moline.
Please, go ahead.
So the way that I interpreted sewer impact has got to go elsewhere to be reviewed. Water has to go elsewhere to be reviewed. If we were to approve these fees, these impact development fees, what is the likelihood that water and sewer is going to come back as an increase as well? And my second part to that question is that burden going to be on new development as well, or is that across the board when I speak of water and sewer?
Sure. So as far as the wastewater fee, we've completed the report itself. So we know what that fee is going to look like. It just needs to go through a different review process. And that is an increase in general. So right now we charge per drainage fixture unit. Under the new fee, it's going to be a flat fee similar to the impact fees that all single family homes that have a 5/8, 3/4 inch meter will be charged one fee. And I think that's about $3,300. And again, an average single family home right now is about 16. So there is an increase in wastewater fees. We know that. We have not come up with what the water meter connection fees will be yet. We are still gathering all of the data on that. So I don't know what that's going to look like, Councilwoman Samily.
How long has it been?
The water meter connection fee, goodness, since 2000. Yeah. Yeah, so the water meter connection fee and the sewer fees, they've been in place for more than 15 years, as they currently are. There have been a few increases along the way, but and then the second part to your question was, and sorry, I didn't write that down. What was the second part to your question?
So the second part to my question was, will these increases for the water and sewer, will they be incurred by new development only, or will it be across the board?
So it is only for new development.
So we're potentially looking at burdening new development with 3 increases.
Potentially.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? You know, it's interesting. We talk about increases, and I certainly know we're talking about wastewater and water increases, but this doesn't exist yet. This contribution to parks, fire, police, protective services, and streets does not exist yet for new developments. So I think, in my mind, I can kind of see them as very different applications to very different funds based on different data that we're presented. So, so for me right now, this is the one that we're concentrating on. And I understand looking at it holistically. I think the key issue I'm looking at is what is this going to contribute to that we care about? And so at that, I'll just turn it back to you, Manager Foggin.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. The one thing that we were surprised about, and I just want to point it out, is we were not prepared or really looking to evaluate the water side of this equation. And the stakeholders actually are the ones that brought it up and said, well, if you're evaluating all these other ones, shouldn't you evaluate water too? It was interesting in that I don't know how long it's been since we've evaluated water, but I don't know if the intention was to make sure that we were charging what we need to be charging. But if that increases, it will be because the stakeholders had suggested we look at it right at this same time. So that came as a little bit of a surprise. Not exactly like Tina said, we don't know what that is ultimately going to look like. But we haven't looked at it in recent history, so the results of that may end up being an increase as well. I don't think the price of things are going down. I wish that were the case, but I guess it's kind of be careful what you ask for, because the two pieces that I don't see us really walking away from anytime soon is sewer and water, and the need to make sure that what's happening in those systems is being paid for by development. And as Councilor or Vice Mayor Watkins had asked, what are people currently paying? They're currently paying for impact on those two systems already. So they're already, fees are already in place for those.
Mayor Miles.
Yeah, go ahead, Chair.
I just had a question, and maybe this is for Mr. Griffin, but the sales tax credit calculations, this is something that I don't know if I may have missed that, but the sales tax credit calculations, how did you come to that? Because in my mind, I'm thinking that yes, this new development is going to bring individuals into our town, which is going to naturally and organically increase our sales tax revenue anyway. So how did you come to that calculation?
Great question. So we looked at the last few years of sales tax expenditures for capital facilities or growth related capital facilities. And then we looked at the projected use of those funds and basically just said, hey, look, on average, we're spending a certain amount, per year. And then said, okay, well, what is the share of the growth related capital facilities to that overall sales tax expenditure? And that way, we didn't want to over credit, but we also wanted to make sure that the credit was large enough where it would offset any sort of overlap.
Okay, so it was basically a credit to that service.
Yes, yeah. So, and here, let me go back so you can, there we go. Yeah, so we just looked at, fire, parks, police, and street and said, hey, basically the capital expenditures related to fire, they were about 1.13% of the overall expenditures. Parks were about 20%, streets about 18%. And so we're just doing a credit against the impact fee based on that amount. So like fire is that 1.13%. And so you see that sales tax credit there. So we're just doing a credit of 1.13% against the cost per person or the cost per job.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Walker, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. This is for Finance Director Moline. Where are we at on the debt service on the 2 sewer treatment plants?
So we are at, I want to say 23 to 24 million is what we still owe on those plans.
Okay. That's good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have another question, which is, when we add a impact fee to the cost of a new home or a new development, how does that translate into the cost of that housing to this buyer? I guess that's for is that for Benjamin, Mr. Griffin?
Sure. So ultimately the cost is going to be passed on to the buyer. But, is 100% of that cost passed on? Maybe, maybe not. The builder may, to ensure a certain return, may say, okay, well, now because the fees are going up, we're not going to put in crown molding. So sort of reduce some of their costs. That way they can offset that increase in fees. So, it's really a community by community, or even, the housing product, because, a buyer for a starter home is going to be more, they're going to be more affected by a price increase. So a developer on, the smaller end may make adjustments to keep that cost low. Whereas, if you're building, a 5,000 square foot house where, price isn't as much of an issue, the developer could pass on 100% of the cost to the buyer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So Mayor, just a follow-up to that, in the white paper that was written talking about the economics of impact fees, it's actually a fairly interesting look at what the effect of impact fees are on home prices. So in the economics, what the white paper probably the most well-known white paper on impact fees. There was 2 authors of that white paper, and they had concluded that what happens in impact fees is that it is not you adopt impact fees at, let's just say, $5,000. All the homes don't go up by $5,000. Generally what happens is, and this is interesting when you read it, is that land prices drop a little bit and homes themselves across the board, including existing homes in the community, go up in price a little bit. So it actually ends up being a little bit of a boom for the existing homeowners, that their house prices go up in the development adoption. So it's an interesting dynamic, but yeah, generally speaking, when we talk about impact fees are generally passed on, and if they're not passed on, they're absorbed by builders and developers. They're absorbed in the reduction or slight reduction in amenities that are offered. So it's a combination thereof.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Is there any study or white paper that you've seen that provides information on the impact of additional amenities in the community to the developments, to the housing?
So you're asking about livability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm not aware of what livability amenities, as far as white papers go. I will just point to communities that you've been to or you know about that have improved amenities and the reputation of those communities in livability. And you know, we in Kingman have some absolutely wonderful, I'll just pick on our softball facilities, amazing facilities for softball and baseball. But as our community grows, the question ultimately becomes how can we add, you know, where is that revenue going to come from to add to those wonderful amenities? AKA, how do we continue to maintain livability? And to be honest with you, our conversations with the council haven't been how do we maintain livability, it's how do we improve livability? So that's ultimately the question, and Councilor Staley, I think, put it perfectly, is that when we started down this path back in 2019, the conversation was, what are the pieces of the puzzle as far as revenue goes that we can line up and fit together to improve livability overall? And clearly this is one puzzle piece to our puzzle on livability. It's clearly not the answer, but it is one substantial piece as we look to keep up with growth. And the added livability piece is something we still have to solve.
Thank you, Manager Foggin. I guess we're ready to move on.
Ben, you have anything else?
I don't.
Okay. Ms. Tina, what else do you got?
I think we're just gonna wrap up and share that these are the proposed fees.
Okay. So is there any other general questions or even specific questions that we need or you have that Ben can help us with? All right. Your silence is telling me there's no other questions on that. So as a wrap up, I just want to point out to the council that the next time we talk about this at a council meeting would be this upcoming council meeting on next Tuesday. And it will be a conversation about the assumptions. It will not be a conversation about the fee amount. It'll be, did we use the right assumptions? Did we look at the appropriate service levels? That is really what's at question at this next council meeting. The other thing that I do want to point out is that now that we have the study done, and when we present the land use assumptions, or just the overall assumptions, we're basically going to bring to you kind of what the maximum amount of impact fee or development fees you could adopt as a council. The thing that you need to know is that you have the option of adopting development fees at a lower rate, but you cannot adopt fees any higher than what's proposed unless the assumptions are changed. So if in fact you think or feel that we got something wrong, like you feel that the average number of people living in multifamily is not 1.55, but you believe it's 2, or the level of service for parks per acre is wrong, and that we need to go back and look at it, that would be the only way that we could adjust impact fees or development fees up. But with that, I do want it to be clear that if the council said, hey, we think we appreciate the land use assumptions, we like the assumptions, but we think you're too high by 20% and we want to adopt a lower rate. That's within your authority to do. Just want to make sure that everybody knows that if we present the impact fees at $4,300 per single family dwelling, that unless we do something to the land use assumptions or the overall kind of assumptions that we've gone through, you're kind of locked into not going any higher than that. And Ben, anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. So, Ms. Tina, anything else?
No, I think we're ready to move on to the public hearing then.
Yeah.
Okay, then we will expect the public hearing and for our decisions on just those things, that level of service and the IIP next week. So if there's no other discussion, then I want to thank Mr. Griffin for being here. Thank you very much, and for your hard work over a long period of time, along with Director Moline and Manager Foggin and the team of, what did you say, 2 years, Ron? It's a long, long journey to get to this point. So thank you so much, and we appreciate it. And so I will adjourn this meeting and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. There was a truck wreck and we have produce over at our yard. If anybody wants some, they're more than welcome.
Thank you.
Yellow squash, cucumbers, bell peppers.
Oh my gosh, that's good stuff.
It is. Anyway, thanks. Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.